What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here, and it's time for patch 12.1, the beginning of the 2022 season. The actual ranked season is going to start in a couple of days, but hey, the patch is going live very soon, or already has, based when you're listening to this video, or watching, or whatever, so let's get into it. Here's the quick TLDR on the patch itself. There were nerfs to Rek'Sai because of both Plat Plus and High Diamond Plus. Solo queue, nerfs to Sona because of Plat Plus solo queue, and buffs to Diana, buffs to Gangplank. This is going to say systems changes, but it's a direct nerf to Eclipse, a strict buff to Force of Nature, a strict nerf to Shield Bow, a strict nerf to Wit's End, and a very large change to Teleport that is probably overall a nerf, but there are some asterisks. If there's one change to pay attention to in this patch, it is definitely Teleport, and we'll get into that. Don't worry about it. Cool visual updates. All right, let's get into it. So first things first, buffs to Diana. Now, many have come to enjoy Diana Jungle. However, it is underpowered, so there's an overall AP ratio buff to the passive, pretty substantially, from 40% to 50%. That said, this ability does have a very high eventual base damage, so there's kind of an asterisk in how big this ratio really is, how much it really matters for like the overall kit damage. But the bigger thing is the monster damage ratio going back up to 3x. Quick point, I always like when they include the full number instead of like, oh, it's 50% bonus. I like things like 1.5x or 3x or whatever, because it's a little bit more obvious, and anyway, it's just, I think it's correct tooltip design. So let's talk about it. So this is, by the way, at the very top, this is 30 days at all ranks, which means we are counting from, basically for me, roughly December 3rd or 4th or 5th, all the way through present day. All solo queue games that are recorded on the website lawlytics.com. And so that's jungle win rate and then mid lane win rate. So across all ranks over the last month, Diana Jungle has been a bit underpowered. Diana Mid has been a little bit strong, but not overbearing. The numbers in parentheses are win rate by game time. Now, I'm specifically excluding low sample size brackets. So there's a bracket I'm not including, which is pre-15-minute game ends. Now, this specifically excludes 15:01 unanimous surrenders. Once 15 rolls around, the bucket is dead. So we are basically not including remakes and open mids where a team got smashed. Now, that said, Diana Jungle can still be actively involved in games where there is an open mid, so there are some games being dropped here, but the work to include it in the unanimous surrender bracket is more than I'm willing to spend for something this minor. The gains are usually way too small for it to be worth it, so I'm not going to be doing it. That said, this is unanimous surrenders. This is 20 to 25, 25 to 30, 30 to 35, and 35 to 40, unless I said something wrong or stupid. I'm not including 40 plus because 40 plus is also a very small bracket. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter because the shape of the line is what's important. And essentially, it's worth noting that Diana Jungle is relatively flat. She doesn't really overtake any other junglers. She doesn't get outscaled by other junglers. It's just, she's just like relatively flat at all points in time. Now, it's worth pointing out, though, that the first number we are measuring is unanimous surrenders, right? This is surrenders between 15 minutes and, 1955 or whatever. This is not, level 6, because that's at 6 minutes into the game. That is not your first clear. This is not even your second clear. This is not your first mythic power spike, because that's going to be at, 8 to 9 minutes, right? We are, by definition, measuring the result of the game another 8 minutes beyond that. This can make it a little bit of a messy metric, but ultimately it still does a pretty good job of measuring, is this a good early game champion? Because most games still don't end at 5 minutes into the game. Most games don't end at 17 minutes into the game. So it's still a good measure in terms of who actually wins the game. Like, gold leads at 6 are irrelevant compared to gold leads at 14, compared to gold leads at 19, because that's when games are actually, kind of spinning up for game-ending situations. So kind of want to point that out as far as, this measure. It's not perfect, but it's also probably the better measure than, like, some of the things we could be looking at, ultimately, because 99% of games aren't open mids pre-surrender. Waiting till 15 to measure a champion actually seems a little bit reasonable. Anyway, Diana Jungle is relatively flat. Diana Mid is a snowball champion. I mean, once again, she's a wave clear assassin functionally. I mean, she has a targeted dash and offloads all of her damage, and okay, her ult's a little delayed, but, she's pretty one-shotty as a champion. As with one-shotty champions, she's an early game snowball pick and, scales off from there. That said, this should mean Diana Mid should be theoretically pro-viable if her matchups are any good, but whatever. Anyway, let's get into what we're actually measuring here. So this is her average damage per auto attack in the jungle before and after the changes. Unless I'm hard trolling, and I'm pretty sure to this correctly, the AP ratio is rolled in here, as is the 3x damage modifier to the jungle. This is using my sort of, I don't want to call it proprietary, it's not that special, but using a decent mock-up for how much AP Diana Jungle should have at any given level. So it's reasonably accurate to a real game situation. And yeah, her single target jungle damage is up by 6%. Now her multi-target jungle damage is going to be up a little bit more than that because, the overall splash is going from, 25 to 30. It's, 20% larger. Either way, like, this is a damage change. Now, as far as mid lane Diana is concerned, or, just sort of not hitting jungle camps overall, this is assuming you're playing mid lane Diana, so we're actually adding a Doran's Ring into the build because you're not going, Ember Knife, you're going for this option. And additionally, it's basically just the AP ratio change. And you can see here that, okay, her average auto attack is dealing 1 to 4% more damage. It's still using her auto attacks. Now, obviously, it is possible to auto dash swipe and get a bigger hit. That's going to be a bigger buff in this case because we're getting just 1 auto and not 3 to bring down the average. But I think this is still a reasonable way of measuring the ability, and this is where we are in terms of what's actually going on here. All right, so Diana Jungle obviously going to gain quite a bit of power. Diana Mid, it's going to be a little bit stronger, but as a champion, all she's getting is an AP ratio buff to the passive, which she's not going to get a lot out of in the early game, and so her early bullying isn't going to be really any stronger. Obviously, it's still a strict buff. I'm not going to say it's not, because obviously she is going to be stronger, but I don't think she's going to become overbearing in the mid lane. As far as jungle, it should be okay. Next up, we have Gangplank. Now, I've seen some talk about Gangplank, how this guy, I one-shots everyone, it's so unhealthy, whatever, and I'm not going to argue frustration. If you're frustrated by Gangplank, fair point. You're frustrated by Gangplank. I'm not going to tell you not to be or whatever. That said, he does have some really strong counter picks. Kale, for example, very good in a Gangplank. It's because you are ranged to have an attack reset. It's actually quite easy to just take his barrels down in lane and farm gold out of them. He can Q spam you early on. It's kind of annoying, but Kale loses every lane early game anyway, so who cares? You get to 6, then suddenly it's fine. Either way, whatever. Basically, Gangplank is not doing too well after Grasp was nerfed off of him. He didn't really get compensation buffs. He's been low win rate forever. Yes, people are doing these one-shot builds, but he's actually still an overall weak champion. So, okay, 5 mana cost off of Parlay and half a second off the cooldown, which is 10% more, right? 10% more Qs. Now, what's interesting is Riot is giving back the early game power of Gangplank, the early lane bully, press Q on you stuff. And the problem is, right, I think this is, by the way, if you're going to buff Gangplank, the right way to buff him, for what it's worth, because if you buff, late game barrel damage, you're exacerbating the one-shot problem. And Gangplank is objectively, as far as I can tell, not very good right now. So all that can really happen is to buff his early game, right? Buff his laning phase, because that's what he was doing before. That got taken away by Grasp. And so where are we now with Gangplank? Well, this is, once again, all ranks 30 days. Now, last I checked, which was not that long ago, maybe a week or so, there is no hidden tech Gangplank build that's actually high win rate. Now, obviously, there are better builds. For example, Trinity Force Gangplank, as far as I can tell, is still his best mythic option. It's just, right, it's a good mix of durability and ability haste and damage, and it's just going to fit the champion really well. Trinity Force seems to be the optimal Gangplank item. I've done a video series recently over the last month. I've put out 2 different videos. I recommend checking them out about champions that are really strong people aren't really playing right now, or better builds for relatively popular champions. There's a lot of actually Trinity Force is good in those videos because Trinity Force is actually good. But anyway, Gangplank's one of these options, and I just kind of want to help that get out there, that people should learn that Trinity Force is actually good. As we're going to take another tangent here, this is another example of this is actually AD carries finally in 2021 and 2022 taking exhaust in the bottom lane. So I spot checked this because I wanted to actually verify. So I looked at, this was last night, I looked at across all ranks over the last 30 days, Kai'Sa is bringing exhaust in the bot lane. I think it's 23% of the time. In 11.8, which was just, the MSI patch, basically, she brought it in 8% of games. It's roughly 3x'd over the course of the last 8 months, and we're still going in this direction. Players are learning that AD carries should run Exhaust or Ignite, and the supports should be the ones running Heal. Now, if you have to run Cleanse, obviously run Cleanse. Sure, okay. A Varus Thresh lane, maybe you run Cleanse to get away from some of the hard CC because you're going to die if a hook lands on you. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. But if it's not that, yo, you should run exhaust. Exhaust is good. Okay, keep that in mind. So we're getting that way, right? We're going. People are learning how to build properly, even though it's been this way for 8-10 years. People are learning to build this way. I'm trying to get people to learn Trinity Force is good. Build Trinity Force. Trinity Force is a good item. You should go Trinity Force. You should build Trinity Force. Trinity Force is good. All right. Anyway, Gangplank is good to Trinity Force. Let's move on. The point stands that Gangplank is, okay, he's kind of good early game. He kind of is a scaling pick, but there was this topic going on. I saw it in esports commentary. I saw it in just overall player-based perceptions that Gangplank is a scaling pick. If you pick Gangplank, you're always going to win late game. That just actually wasn't ever true. Gangplank, since his grass builds, was a lane bully. Gangplank kicked your ass in lane. You weren't allowed to farm. He had complete lane priority. And if you had a CC jungle, you could set up dives because you would poke the enemy champion out of lane. And if not, you would just get Herald or whatever, right? And you just get stuff done. You could, leave a Gangplank on an island and he would just lane really, really well. And he had wave clear, but he wasn't actually a late game champion. That's not really where he actually lived. This is still kind of the case here. His win rate is actually relatively flat, right? We can see here that in our, over the last month, in our 40-minute Gangplank games, he still has a 47% win rate because even though he can barrel one-shot people, and that can be very frustrating, and I'm not going to debate how frustrating the champion is for any of you playing at home, he's still not actually good at that. That's the kind of win rate of a 40-minute Zed, where Zed can also potentially one-shot you. If he gets target access in the team fight phase, or he split pushes as a melee champion, which is very difficult because it's hard to get access to turrets as a melee champion because, the Kale just kills you if you ever auto-attack something. And I know Kale's a special case, but, I've been playing Kale recently, and it's really dumb. Melee champions can't fight you in late game anymore. It's kind of hilarious. So, data says that Gangplank is actually not that good late game. Now, to be fair, Gangplank might have an MMR skew, right? Gangplank might actually be, 49% in Diamond Plus or something. I don't know. I didn't look that up. But, for most people, and most people are ones complaining, Gangplank is objectively not good. He's not good early game. He's not good late game. He's just not a very good champion. So, yes, he should in fact be buffed. For the vast majority of players, Gangplank needs to be buffed. If you really are frustrated by him, go ahead and ban him like you ban Zed, who's also not very good. Deal with it, right? If you don't find the champion fun to play against, either play a counter pick and just win your matchups because they're popular, or, I don't know, draft better. Whatever. At the end of the day, again, some champions are going to be frustrating for some people. I understand that. Zoe's down to a 1% ban rate right now, so clearly people have, fallen off that train at a certain point. I don't know. Just, that's my ramble. Let's move on. Gangplank, yes, a pretty meaningful mana cost buff here, and 10% more Q cast is not going to mean a whole lot for the late game because ultimately barrels are the limiting factor for the late game, huge team fight damage, so you're still going to be worrying about barrels more than Qs. Next up, we have one of the two champion nerfs. It is Rek'Sai. Now, as you can see here, Rek'Sai is too strong in skilled play, especially with Emax. So this is another thing where I have tried to help people, and this happened to the LCS. So Broxa played Rek'Sai, I think 2 different games for CLG last year in the LCS. And pro tip, everyone, you're supposed to Emax on Rek'Sai. You not only get tunnel cooldown, you get more burst damage off the E. Q rank up is not very good. Something like 75% of Rek'Sai's in solo queue, even across different elo bands, are doing Qmax. And Broxa also went Qmax. He is a professional League of Legends player. His literal job is to play League of Legends as best he could possibly be played, and couldn't bother to look up skill orders. Pro players are almost ubiquitously idiots. It is not hard to get simple, basic things correct, and yet here he is, a professional League of Legends player, being paid to play the game for his full-time job, and he can't even get skill orders correctly. This kind of stuff is very frustrating. To watch the sidelines where it's I don't even play Rek'Sai, I barely play jungle, and I know more than him as a professional jungler. That is so agitating from the sidelines. Anyway, Emax Rek'Sai is correct. There's a couple of interesting data points here. Despite Rek'Sai being this old and being in the game for this long, players have still not learned that fact. And at the end of the day, okay, you could... Maybe you say it's a design fail, maybe you don't. I don't really know. At the end of the day, the important thing is the fact that I'll say it in this way. I'll defend it in this way. Ultimately, at the end of the day, players aren't skilling Rek'Sai correctly, and you can say it's the designer's fault. I don't know if that's really true or not, whatever. At the end of the day, players think they should max Q, and they're wrong. I think it's completely reasonable as a live game designer to say, you know what, screw it. Let's just make Q max as good. And now, there's a couple things I want to say here. So one, I actually like the idea just in general, just like on a blank sheet of paper, of trying to make as many skill orders viable as possible, because that means you have more choice as a player, right? Why can't there be an option to W max on Vhagar or E max on Sona? Now, some of these are going to be like just completely non-starters, and it's just like not really possible to make that happen. And then, there's going to be a lot of cases like that, where it's just like, this is not realistic. I think that's okay, right? Like, I don't think Olaf ever gets to max W first. Like, I think that's just way too troll. At a certain point, it's reasonable to be like, well, this skill is not really ever going to happen. But I think in some cases you really can get there. And I think you really do have to pay attention as a live designer to like, oh, players are playing it wrong. And, how many tools do you really have as a designer where it's like, hey, this champion is functionally inaccessible to most players because she doesn't intuitively make sense, right? Whatever it is, like you've inherited a game, you're a live designer, and it's like, well, Rek'Sai exists here. And I could spend a lot of time trying to like rework fully Rek'Sai, or I could just reshuffle rank ups a little bit and make Qmax correct. And to me, like that feels like it makes way more sense, right? Like that seems really logical to me. And so I'm a fan of that, and I think this is a positive change. So again, even in ultra high elos, like 75% of players still max Q first. Like, this is Masters Plus. In Masters Plus, 3/4 of Rek'Sai is max Q first. That is objectively wrong. Now, there are two builds that are actually good. It's 3 points Q and then max E from level 7 onwards for 7, 8, 9, 10 for max E. Or it's just straight up 2 points Q. Like, it's either like QWQ or QWE. Like maybe it's Q at 4, maybe it's just E at 4 and 5. But basically, 2 to 3 points Q, max E is easily, definitively the best build in Rek'Sai. All right. Next thing, as we kind of move on and we talk about more topics. Emax is easily the best on Rek'Sai, but it's like 1/4 the pick rate. Rek'Sai is an early game champion by a lot. She falls off a cliff because it turns out she has a pretty decent jungle clear and has a functionally targeted crowd control because she has like a 1100 range dash that goes over walls and then right clicks on you, and even if you try to flash, she probably still knocks you up, and her entire combo just like hits during Halo Blades. She hits you with her true damage E-Bite, and you took an unavoidable 400 damage gank with a 1-second crowd control. You probably died to the gank, right? And so Rek'Sai forces a lot of early surrenders and then falls off. And I don't know how you solve that problem, but that's what's happening. So anyway, to get into what's happening in this patch list overall. Oh, actually, the final thing is she's also really high MMR skewed. As we can see from the very top, the nerfs were because of Plat Plus and Diamond 2 Plus. Better players are better at doing Emax first, by the way. So this is going to actually tap down elo skew a little bit, but unfortunately, I do think Rek'Sai needs a mid-sized project to fix similar to the changes that were done to Aurelia and Silas a year and 2 years ago, which did just wonders in flattening them out for elo skew. I think that kind of project should be done for Rek'Sai. I think it would be pretty useful, and would get a lot of mileage out of fixing elo skew and removing a lot of the frustration of early jungle gank power. Okay, so what's happening is E is becoming more of a 1-point wonder. The rank up goes from 50 to 90 to 55 to 75, so a huge tap down in the rank up power. The tunnel cooldown also goes down with rank up. Now, I think realistically, tunnel cooldown could have been, I mean, it's weird, right? Like, this is a tough change list, and generally as live design, they want to do for like just flat nerfs, flat whatever. They don't want to do high risk changes. They want to do like, hey, this is always going to do what we expect it to do, right? This is always going to be a nerf if we want a nerf. It's always going to be a buff if we want a buff. You don't want to do, throw a bunch of changes and then like hope it goes the right way. But essentially, I think Tunnel could use early game nerfs. I think it's already 26 seconds of cooldown, right? So it's already like a pretty big cooldown early games. I don't know how much more you can do with this one. I don't really love, for example, range changes in this ability. Like, that would feel pretty bad. So I'm not sure if it can actually do anything. But essentially, are there ways to nerf the early game of Rek'Sai? Maybe not. I don't know. But let's talk about what's going on here. Because the rank up has got worse, right? By 1 second per rank up. Okay, well, here is Rek'Sai. The E damage, if you're doing E max on the left side or Q max on the right side, and this is her win rate in all ELO's 30 days, right? So this is all solo queue games over the last 30 days. And you can see if there's a unanimous surrender, she's on the winning side 55% of the time. That is very, very high for that metric. If there is a sub 25-minute victory, she's on the winning side 52% of the time. she's still, 50-50 up until 25 minutes or so, or 30 minutes, and then, falls off. If you outlast a Rek'Sai in all elos, you're going to be just fine, right? Okay, off we go. Wonderfully done. Touche. Anyway, so, yes, your first jungle clear is going to be just a little bit faster, right? 2 points in E is only going to happen at level 4 or so, realistically. So your first clear is actually objectively faster on Rek'Sai. The AD rate shouldn't go anywhere. But if you're E-maxing, your later ganks don't mean as much. From level 5 onwards, or in some cases level 7 onwards, if we're doing 3 points Q and then Rek'Sai is going to be weaker doing an E-max build, which means, maybe we aren't going to do an E-max build. Now, if we're going to do Q-max, if we're doing Q-max, we are objectively buffed for a large portion of the game. This is kind of the weird part, right? Is like, the win rate delta between Q-max and E-max is, I want to say, like 3 or 4% win rate. It's like quite substantial. And so, going to Q-max, which is again, 3 to 4% win rate drop, but getting 5 damage out of the E, is that going to be a 5% win rate buff? Like if you were forced to play Q-max Rek'Sai, but Riot said, but your E does 5 more damage, would you gain that 4% win rate difference back? Probably not, right? So if Rek'Sai is forced to Q-max, this is still not a buff to Rek'Sai, because Q-max is much weaker, and you still have this stuff in the late game. This, of course, means that late game Rek'Sai numbers are going to be even lower, and ultra early game Rek'Sai's numbers are going to be even higher, because it's objectively a buff until level 5, and sometimes level 7, sometimes level 8, whatever. That's pretty meaningful, right? Like, that's worth thinking about. But the first jungle clear is not the important thing about Rek'Sai, really. Now, the other part is the tunnel cooldown. So once again, left side is E max, right side is Q max. Once again, not nerfed until level 8. But here is her win rate this is Diamond 2 plus over the last 30 days. It's a 54% win rate champion. Indeed, worthy of being nerfed. 59%. Yeah, Rek'Sai is 60-40 in unanimous surrenders. Just as one champion. Just because Rek'Sai is on your game, you're 60-40 for unanimous surrenders, right? That's how much early game power she has. This is very high. This is very absurd for a game with 9 other champions and randomly allocated teammates and opponents. 60-40 at 15-minute surrenders. That is really, really absurd. And it's still 57% for the, non-unanimous, but we still surrender pretty early game stuff. Like, this is a lot of early game power. Yeah, this champ is quite strong. She is very good for high elo, where you can snowball the early game. It looks really good there. Yeah, worth pointing out, worth thinking about. Okay, next up, we have a nerf to Sona. Now, Sona is an interesting boat. I don't know if she is scaling with player skill. I actually haven't looked. Apparently, the case is that she is doing too well in Plat Plus, but not D2 Plus and not all elo, whatever. But of course, Archangel Staff, of course, is quite good. So hey, you buy a tier, you do the thing, feels pretty good. So scaling nerfs, armor growth is down, and cooldown on E is down. Basically, I actually like the E cooldown change a lot. I think it's actually very smart. So here is Sona as a champion. All right, this is once again all ranks. 30 days, 53% win rate, very, very high. So even if she is over the line in Plat Plus, keep in mind, like 75-85% of players are gold or lower. I think Plat Plus is like 15%. Something 15-10%, something around there, right? So like a large portion of games, so we're mostly measuring, to be fair, right? We're mostly measuring bronze, silver, gold. The two largest buckets by far are silver and gold. So, we're definitely measuring a lot of the mid lane, the mid brackets of skill right here, but whatever, that's fine. We're just measuring all players. That's okay. Nothing wrong with that. But this is Sona's armor before and after. Notice she has 26 armor, which is very, very low. Her base health is 480. That is also very, very low. Sona is very frail in the early game. With the armor scaling nerfs, she's down about 5 armor late game, which is about 6% less armor. This by itself is not that important as a measurement. What we really care about is here. This is her total physical durability as a champion. This is how much physical damage she can take pre-mitigation before she dies. 605 damage pre-mitigation is very, very low. Yes, she'll have a spell thief for a bit more health, but who cares? It's not a very big deal. Ultimately, she has about 3% less durability late game. We can kind of break this out to an extra digit if we want. But yeah, about 3% less durability late game. I mean, realistically, we're looking at, a lot of mid-game stuff around here. It's like 1.5% less durability against physical damage in the mid to late game. Now, of course, she's probably running a rune shard for +6 armor, things like that. So the numbers are actually even less important than you might think. But it's just it's a small tap down, right? They're not trying to bring Sona to 50% win rate. They're just trying to bring her down out of 53, 54% win rate, which this might do. The change I really like, though, if we look at this, is that she's not so much a scaling pick as much as I'm really bad in lane, but once we're in team fights, we're Gucci. Like, she doesn't kind of keep scaling up to the right in the way that like a Kai'Sa or a Vayne does, right? Where they just keep going, and it just kind of gets better and better and better. By comparison, you can see someone like Zed or Diana, which we had earlier, where it just keeps falling off down to the right over and over and over again as we get farther and farther and farther into late game phases. The assassin couldn't close out the game, and now it's too late. Sona just like gets out of lane, gets out of unanimous surrenders, and then as long as we've like made it 20 minutes and it's not completely doomed, right? Because some games like, well, we didn't surrender, but like they've already gotten the first 3 dragons, they actually baroned at 21 minutes, and well, we're gonna lose this game. Like, that can obviously happen off of getting completely snowballed out of bot lane, whatever. But essentially, if you survive lane at all, and you've managed to go somehow equal, and that's tough because Sona is very frail and very bullyable. If you survive that at all, well, you're just kind of flat into the mid game, right? At 20 minutes plus, she's just a 52 to 54% win rate champion, which is right just where she lives. So it doesn't spike that hard. Obviously, going 52 at the 20-25 to 55 at the 25 plus. That's because right there are those. Well, we lost lane, we didn't surrender yet. We're gonna surrender at 21 minutes. That's a carryover from like the getting stopped early game stuff. But at the end of the day, basically just once you get out of lane and you haven't completely catastrophically closed your game out, she's just kind of good. It's not like she like has really good AP ratios or that like level 16 is the big power spike. Like, it's actually not, that's not really what's happening. She's not really turbo scaling anymore when we compare to like the old R ranks, where R ranks would give you like base cooldown reduction on your abilities, and that made she turbo scale a character level. Now she's like, well, it's flattened out. I just kind of get some ability haste, and that's a much more linear scaling. And so I'm just chill, once we're into the mid game. And they're just kind of vaguely good there. That's interesting, right? Like, maybe that means the, max haste could go down a little bit. That, who knows, anything that does have level scaling could go down a little bit. That you could buff her early laning phase a little bit more, give her, that 20 more health and that 4 more armor or whatever. Sona is less skewed than she was in the past, and maybe you could do, there's more that could be done to fix that further down the line. Or maybe it's okay that Sona is a weak laner who, if we survive lane, is a team fight support pick. Like, I think that's actually a reasonable niche to live in. I personally enjoy that. I think it's actually cool strategically, like personal feelings. But not everyone can feel that way, so hey, whatever. Maybe Sona's R needs like, I don't know, whatever it is, right? Who cares? All right. Anyway, yeah, moderate size nerf for Sona. Again, they usually aim for about 1% with these changes, so I feel like it's going to happen. Next up is Eclipse. Eclipse gets 2 seconds on its cooldown back up. Despite being weak overall, Eclipse was the strongest lethality mythic before preseason, and so we overdid its buffs in 11.23. So basically, it was the strongest lethality mythic, but lethality mythics were weak. It's still the best lethality mythic, so okay, undo some of the buffs, fair enough. 2 seconds back on the cooldown for its melee form. Okay, great. Force of Nature, the buffs, the buff stacks. As you take these stacks, you gain Absorb. Absorb does nothing until you get to max stacks, and then bam, bonus movement speed, magic damage reduction, and it turns on, and you feel really great. This is, by the way, a lot of damage reduction. Now, generally speaking, Riot has a pretty smart report about these items where like they can say, hey, what is the win rate of Force of Nature second? What is the win rate of Force of Nature third? How does it compare to the other MR options? Because there are 3. Like, there's clearly Spirit Visage, there's clearly Abyssal Mask, there's clearly Force of Nature. And it's like, oh, Force of Nature underperforms against the other 2 options at every item timing. Force of Nature seems to be the worst MR legendary. We can buff Force of Nature, right? Like, this is pretty reasonable to do. And I like this. I think this is a reasonable way to measure items. You can probably look at pick rate as well to some degree. I'm actually a really big fan of measuring more for pick rate for runes and items. I don't think this is an opinion that everyone should share. It might not even be correct. It's just an opinion. I'm not in a position to test it out by any means, but I think pick rate is a really relevant measure for this as well. And regardless, what it comes down to is, hey, right, it's doing worse than its counterpart Spirit Visage, so okay, adding some more force to the Force of Nature. Anyway, basically, it's actually a reasonable item, so its gold efficiency is not outstanding. Actually, we're going to keep Spirit Visage and Abyssal Mask on the screen so we can kind of look at them. These items are all, 80-ish% gold efficient in terms of basic stats. Abyssal Mask is cheaper, so it can kind of throw off the math a little bit here. It obviously has the least baseline statistics, but the important thing to point out is what does it give you otherwise. In this case, right, here's Force of Nature compared to Spirit Visage. You can see that the items give a very similar amount of stats overall, especially if you value the move speed. But apparently Fawn, right? It takes too long to get online compared to if it's just like, oh yeah, I always get the healing and shielding power, so it's no big deal. So here's how this works out. Okay, so when you get to max stacks of Dissipate, you get 10% movement speed, and you reduce magic damage taken by 20%. Considering that you have 70 MR already on the item, you're already at least 100 MR. Well, how much MR? Once you're already at 100, how much MR is 20% less magic damage taken worth? And it's about 50 MR. So the value of 50 MR and 10% move speed is 47% of the gold efficiency of the item. But that's only when max stacked, which of course is not at all times. So, it's a lot of times 84%, and then suddenly it's, 130%. Which, seems like a reasonable spot to put the item, seems okay. It's getting buffed, though, to a 25% damage reduction, and the stacks last longer, so you're going to get there more reliably. A 25% magic damage reduction is more like 66.6 repeating MR, because you're at 200. How do you take 1/4 less damage? 66 and change magic resist, which makes this easily the biggest MR item in the game. It is easily the best option for tanking the most magic damage possible, right? By comparison, Abyssal Mask theoretically could have had 65 MR on it, which, to be fair, was never as much as Force of Nature in the first place. I'm kind of a fan of that, right? I'm kind of a fan of that looking there. The difficulty being that, like, hey, what's 65 MR and 450 health versus 70 MR and 350 health? That always feels a little awkward to me. I'm never quite a fan of that happening, where now there's a math problem for which one's actually better, because theoretically you don't always get Dissipate, right? Like, if you're going to walk through the team fight and you're just going to get Flash Mouse ulted and you want to not die during that, well, Dissipate's not going to hit you in time, right? But, like, this will. And so it's a math problem, right? And this always feels a little rough when you have this math problem here, which is why I really like trying to have more of these items be more similar, right? If they could all have 450 health, and this, like, if this Lotus had 450 health and 65 MR, I would actually think it was a better item. Now, obviously, the gold efficiency skyrockets when that happens, but, like, it makes the comparisons easier. That's all. Anyway, moving forward, though, this is obviously, now it's 140% gold efficient when fully stacked instead of 130% gold efficient when fully stacked. Like, this is, obviously very clearly a buff. Making the comparisons across these items, I think, is doable. And yeah, make your choices. I think it makes it a pretty reasonable option, and obviously Visage is the more direct comparison, since Abyssal Mask is the more offensive bent of the item. All right, next up is Immortal Shield Bow. Immortal Shield Bow is getting nerfed by 5 attack damage and 25 to 150 off the shield. That is pretty meaningful. So here is Shield Bow right there. Immortal Shield Bow before and after, as well as Kraken Slayer and Gale Force. Here are our items. So it loses 5 AD, which drops the gold efficiency down to 101%, which, to be fair, puts it in line with Gale Force. And okay, Kraken Slayer is just the raw, I auto-attack you damage item, so I think it's reasonable for that one to have the most just raw stats. I think that's reasonable to do. It has 5 more AD, 5 more attack speed than Gale Force, and it has 15 more AD and 5 more attack speed than Immortal Shield Bow. I think that's reasonable for Kraken Slayer to live in that spot. I think it's totally valid. But anyway, yeah, we're losing, right, again, 25 to 150 on the shield. Now, it's worth pointing out that Immortal Shield Bow still has 15 to 35 attack damage on it. I really would like if it wouldn't give you attack damage on Lifeline. I think it is not why you buy the item. It is not obvious that is part of the item. It's only in the tooltip. It is, so by comparison, right, Janna E only does 2 things, and it's a champion. So it's like, I have my E, it shields my teammate, and while they're shielded, they gain bonus AD. And technically, the bonus AD is not sold in any meaningful way, but like an ability tooltip that only has 2 lines of text is pretty reasonable. I'm not saying Janna E is the best designed ability in the game. It is certainly not, but like that feels like a reasonable spot to say, hey, there's AD attached to this shield. Lulu's E is even better. Lulu's E is one of the best designed shields in the game. Lulu's E is like, hey, Pix attaches to you and shoots bolts out when you auto attack. That's like really obvious, makes a lot of sense, and is outstanding. Like, it's a flavor win. It sells it really well. I am a huge fan of the design of Lulu E. It is a better Janna shield, basically. 10 out of 10, really well designed shield. Maybe the best designed shield in League of Legends, because of how it actually properly like tells you what it does. Like, absolutely outstanding. Well done there. Karma E is reasonable because like the move speed just like is inherently noticeable because it's movement speed. You just feel it. It's there. It's fine. That's like a decent one. Anyway, Immortal Shield Bow By the way, gives you attack damage when it pops. Mob Mortius used to give you attack damage and like Omnivamp and stuff. Like the idea was like your shield would pop and you like lifesteal back up and it would like felt cool. Sterak's Gauge, I believe, just gives you a shield and no stats anymore. I think the Ma stats also went away, by the way. It's just a shield now. But Shield Bow still has the give stats when shield pops. And like, I'm just not a fan of that because no one's buying a shield. I don't know. It feels weird that Shield Bow is the option of like, but secretly it's a damage item, right? It's like, here's Kraken Slayer, which clearly does more damage than Shield Bow, except sometimes Shield Bow does more damage, does not sit well with me as an item. Like, that just feels very wrong to me from a design standpoint. That this is clearly the durability option. Like, yeah, the Mythic passive is plus AD, which means theoretically it passes Gale Force's raw DPS, but like, whatever. Like, it truly is not that big of a deal. Like, this is so minor by comparison that it doesn't matter. The fact that this gives you 35 attack damage means it's an 85 AD item, but really a 100 AD item. Yeah, Shiva has the most AD of any AD Mythic by a ton. It gives you 100 attack damage. Not a fan, right? And you know, Riot cleaned this up with Gore Drinker a while back, where Gore Drinker just gave you like 10% or 50% more total AD by being low on health, and it's like, oh, turns out Assassins buy Gore Drinker because the tank bruiser mythic is the damage mythic. Yeah, no shit, right? And it's like, oh yeah, here's Aurelia, who like, oh yeah, you know, she's a damage champion, she's gonna dive backline. Oh, you pop my shield bow, I have 100 bonus AD, you're dead. And it's like, why is the tank mythic the damage mythic? Right, like Trinity Force is meant to be that option for her by giving her like actually a lot of attack damage and being like, yeah, here's a bit of durability, but I dive backline, right? Trinity Force gives you 50 something attack damage. It gives you 30 base and 30% of your total, I think is of your base. So it's like it's gonna give you like 60 to 70 AD. It's gonna give you 30 something attack speed. It's right. Oh no, Shield Bow literally eclipses all of those numbers. Like literally all of those numbers. It gives you more AD. It gives you, okay, less attack speed, fair. It gives you functionally more health because of Lifeline and the Mythic passive. It gives you Lifesteal. It's like, wait, why would I ever buy Eclipse? Or sorry, why would I ever buy Trinity Force? Now, turns out the Spellblade proc is actually quite good and all these things, but like, if you're gonna look at tooltips and be like, yeah, but what does it really give me? It's like, oh, why would I not buy Shield Bow, right? Like, it sort of, to me, fails a tooltip test. Where it's like, wait, what is this thing about anyway? Like, really? And I understand, like, there's a desire to, like, add spice to the Lifeline passive, but, like, I personally, and maybe I'm wrong, right? Like, personally, I don't like this. Personally, Personally, I am, and this makes me boring, like, and I know that this is actually not the right way to design a game, that you actually want spice in the game. Like, you want things that are exciting to get people excited to play and excited to do stuff. Like, this is like how you design card games. Like Legends of Runeterra or Teamfight Tactics, is like people play for the new exciting thing. They don't play because like they don't really play because the game is balanced. They play because the game is fun and they want to play like the cool thing that exists. And this is true as well for League of Legends. They want to play the cool thing that exists. And so making really boring items or just stat stakes is not a good way to design items. And I understand that, right? But I also like choice structure to exist properly, and Shield Bow having the most AD of any crit item, to me, fails that choice structure because of Lifeline. So this circles back to, I would prefer if they nerfed the bonus AD off Lifeline and kept the shield and went the exact same way they went with Gore Drinker, which is, why don't you just make the actual effect the item is there for better? Like, that's where I think the item should live. But that's just an opinion, doesn't mean I'm right. Anyway, again, you can compare it to Gale Force or Kraken Slayer as much as you want. These numbers up here, the 91 to 81%. This is how much of the shield is left remaining afterwards. So if you bought it first item, and this is level 8, level 9, or whatever, it's 8% less shield. If you're waiting all the way to level 18, or eventually get to level 18 and it's popping late game, it's 19% less shield. That obviously matters quite a bit. It's going to be a nerf, just not the nerf that I really wanted. But oh well. I'm glad we have the 5 AD nerf. I still just would have wanted the Lifeline AD nerf. Whatever. Moving on. Next one is Wit's End. So we have a double hit on basically anti-mage bruisers. As Shield Bow Wit's End was quite common for champions like, I think Yasuo, Yone, even a bit of, actually a lot of Aurelia was doing this. Wit's End was a pretty often rush for someone like Akshan. Basically, yeah, a lot of fighters, anyone who could scale off attack speed just kind of rushed Wit's End. They crushed mages. Now, Wit's End already does a nice thing where its bonus damage doesn't scale until, I believe, level 8. I believe level 8 is the first number where it goes up, or level 9 is the first number where it goes up. So this thing does actually 5 or 10 or 15 damage on hit if you buy it first item. So you're paying for very little on hit damage. If you buy it later on, it goes up quite a bit to 65 or so. The last few levels actually scale very, very small. It at level 6. it's like 15, 25, 35, 45, 55, 65, and then it like scales like +2 per level until it's 70 or something like that. It's like something like that. I think it's like reasonable to do. I don't think it's like a bad way of designing the item. It makes it like actually good in the mid game, right? Like it allows it to be good second or third where it's meant to be good. While nerfing it for first item, I think like the designer made a good choice on like where the numbers were put. I'm a really big fan of just doing really wonky things with like the tooltip numbers in the middle of like hand designing those. Like it's actually pretty wise. Am a fan of that. Anyway, Wit's End -10 MR. Here is the item before and after, 11.24 versus 12.1. Still a gold efficient source of raw AD, AS, and MR. As far as 15 on hit damage, you can usually value that at about 375 AD. Basically, 1.5x attack damage to on hit is a relatively fair scaling for mathing out on hit damage. So yeah, 15 times on hit is about right here. This is basically just based off of recurve bow. Recurve bow is the baseline on hit item. It's basically 1.5x, so there's the numbers. And that seems reasonable. Overall, again, legendaries are meant to be 105% stat efficient. Now that said, it can be very hard to have both raw AD and raw AS be what's the word? Properly valued, because so here's the thing, right? And this is why I think it's completely fair to break the convention of, exactly X gold efficient or whatever. Because most ranged champions won't get full value out of the MR. They're like often not going to be hit by Fiddlestick's ultimate. They're not going to be able to hit by Malzahar. Okay, the Xerath can do it, sure, but like, they're just not going to be hit by a lot of the magic damage that exists. Like most AoE damage is magic. Like big AoEs, again, Fiddlestick's ultimate, like Nasus R. Like, how is Darius gonna be outside of Nasus R? He's just gonna take the damage, right? It's just gonna be there. How could he not? He has to be in melee range, Nasus is gonna hit him. Whereas like Caitlyn gets to just net backwards and play full power of combat while not taking Nasus magic damage. And like Nasus E, like who cares? It's the only thing hitting you. You can kite it, right? Whereas Darius, like if he walks out of Nasus E, just like isn't dealing any damage, Caitlyn can walk out of Nasus E while like dueling optimal auto attack DPS and staying in range of people, right? Like that's why MR is often not as valuable on ranged champions, because you're just not going to get full value. And the same is kind of true with armor. At the end of the day, right? Like if Fiddlesticks managed to flash Fear ult on top of you, you died anyway, right? Like unless you can QSS flash out. Like, if you got caught by Fiddlestick's ultimate, Wit's End is not the reason you're living, whereas Wit's End might be the reason Darius lives, because Darius has a health pool. In a similar vein, Caitlyn gets basically full value out of the attack speed. She's always in range to attack and always able to get full value out of the AS. It's a lot harder for Darius to always have a target to attack speed. So any item that gives both attack speed and durability is going to always be in a weird spot where it's just a little bit feast or famine, because it's not that fighters can't want attack speed and can't want MR, and that range shavers can't want MR. I mean, the fact that, Akshan versus Syndra is a matchup, yep, he needs MR in that matchup, right? Like, it makes total sense. There's a lot of times where it is exactly optimal, and lo and behold, Wit's End is the optimal first item for Akshan versus Syndra, because no duh. But, right, it's a little bit tougher otherwise, to get full value out of everything. So, okay, fair enough, this is how it works, whatever, But this is why this item kind of is allowed to live at above 113% gold efficiency, because it also gives you 20 move speed on auto attack, so there's even more going on, which is not even mathed out right there. Because, yeah, the item is never really, the perfect full function of all the stats. Like, imagine, I think I've gone long enough. This is good enough. Okay, let's move forward. So here is the final major change that means a ton. Teleport is getting reworked. Pre 14 minutes, teleport can only target turrets, but the cooldown is about a minute shorter. After 14 minutes, the cooldown is a very short 4 minutes, and it can hit everything as before. So I spot checked exactly one game. I went to my most recent solo queue game. I paused at 14 minutes, and I took a look at all the top laners, all the mid laners, and all the bot laners. Basically, everyone was between level 8 and level 11. One of the mid laners was like 9.8. I was 10 and change. The TP Heimerdinger was 11. The Scion I was against was also 10. And both bot laners were level 8, but like level 8 and change. So basically, this is the inflection point, which means 1 through 7 is going to be perfectly accurate. The old teleport, the cooldown was based on your champion level. And so you can see here that for the first 5 levels, teleport's cooldown is definitely faster, but of course can only affect or only target turrets. For level 6 and 7, if you happen to cast it this much later, it's got a longer cooldown and can only affect turrets. And then for the easy part in the later game, 12 through 15, it's the same ability with a shorter cooldown, and the ultra late game 16 level, 16, 17, 18, it's the same ability with a slightly longer cooldown. That said, you didn't really use this much teleport cooldown super late on, so it doesn't really matter. But it's worth noting that this is a 4-minute cooldown, so it is always going to be doing that sort of sync up with, Dragon and Baron spawns where you can't get a second one off, right? Like if you're TPing the Dragon, you've got a 2-minute window, and then you've got to TP the Dragon again. That's just how that's going to work. I guess you have a 1-minute window, but like if it's Elder, it's 6 minutes, whatever, moving on. A lot of times if you're level 17, it's probably Elder already. But yeah, the 8 through 11 part is where it gets funky. There are going to be spots here. And so I'm basically just choosing like a 9 to 10 as the break point for, at this champion level, it's become minute 14. So there's, there can be some spots, right here where it's like, oh, it's actually like a way more powerful summoner immediately as plates drop. It can be a way more powerful summoner spell. And immediately before plates drop, it is far weaker, where it can't target minions, and the cooldown's longer, and it's a dog summoner. So that's the change in the numbers. As far as the actual implications, obviously it's a pretty big deal. So 2 things going on here. One, this affects the 1v1 laning matchup in 2 ways. So first of all, your teleport's coming back faster. So if you get all in first blood by Darius level 1. He goes flash, it got you, whatever, and you TP back at level 1, well, you get a full 1 minute back, so, your 3-minute cooldown, your TP at 3 minutes is going to be back at 9 minutes instead of being back at 10 minutes. That can matter sometimes, so congratulations, you got 1 minute back off your cooldown. So it can do a little bit there. The next part is that, of course, it can't go to your minions, which means you cannot immune a minion, which means you cannot guarantee the lane is going to freeze for you. If you, do whatever, if you shove the wave in, if you get your advantage and you take a recall, and your opponent tries to push, and you just TP on that last minion, and you go, I'm TPing onto this, and I bought, and I'm full health and mana, and you're out of cooldowns, so enjoy getting frozen on, right? That player doesn't get screwed like that anymore, because you TP to the tower, the push gets to pretty much get guaranteed, and there's a lot that goes on there. So there's a lot of pressure kind of being alleviated from the volatility of top lane, where in the I got screwed case, it's a little bit nicer for the I got screwed person. And in the I'm going to completely dumpster you and you have no lane control, that's kind of gone as well because you can't immune the minion. So those are both fairly relevant and should soften the volatility of top lane a little bit. The other part, as a bot laner that I like a lot, is people aren't TPing towards my lane anymore. Now I know this is going to be contentious. Of course it is. Of course it's going to be contentious. But no longer are people TPing on that control ward behind you in lane and double killing your bot lane for playing aggressively. Now, wards are going to let you see the jungler coming, and people have to roam like regular people. And this is going to do a lot. This is going to do a ton. It's probably going to be a strict buff to Shen. I'm going to expect that Shen gains a lot of win rate off of this, especially in higher elos, because you're not going to global them nearly as often. So Shen is the only one who can show up. Gallia mid probably gets a lot of power here as well. Now, there are a lot of cases where this is still good. Keep in mind, again, the early cooldowns are shorter. There are a lot of like level 5 tower dives, especially in pro play, where your mid laner TPs the top tower to save you and the dive gets called off. This is going to happen. This exists. This is a real thing that totally is there and worth considering. This matters some. Like there is still some agency here. The defensive teleports, specifically the defensive teleports, are still up, and in fact they're up with shorter cooldowns. At least pre 6, post 6 of course it is weaker, and that's again worth mentioning, worth knowing. I don't think it's a huge problem, just like worth noting. But I mean ultimately I think this is overall probably a nerf to teleport. The fact that you can't TP to minions pre 14 minutes is a nerf to teleport. It is meaningful. It matters. Movers are going to see a lot less teleports, and that means a lot fewer teleports. And that means that, over the course of this patch, like you should pay attention to your favorite champion. And if you have any stats websites you like, I think Lawlytics is a great one, for example. You should, check the summoner spell win rate of your champions and just check TP versus Ignite versus Barrier versus whatever and see if it's worth it to stick on or to go off, because you're going to know in about 2 to 3 days what the correct option is, and if you're willing to look into data and use it, You're going to have some answers for yourself. Again, better for defensive laning very early on. Better for actually cross-mapping in the early mid-game. But, right, there's a pretty big swath here where the cooldown was worse, and the ability to TP to bot lane was going to matter, and it's not there anymore. But it doesn't mean things like, Ziggsbot or Ezreal bot who are just TPing to get back to lane because they don't have a real summoner they wanted to use. Still going to be there, still going to be pretty good. Alrighty, next rank split starts pretty soon. Hype stuff there. I want to point out a couple of other minor things to talk about. So 14 days, the banked decay games for Masters Plus. They went decay as fast, and they'll decay down to Diamond 2 instead of Diamond 1. Fair enough. New icons look pretty cool. New ranked emblems look pretty cool. And then I want to point out intentional feeding detection has been improved to evaluate more variables and will go live in all regions this patch. Single best change of the patch, probably. I mean, that and the teleport change. I like the teleport change as the bot laner. That is a very big deal. Woo! I hope it's good. I really hope it's good. That could be very awesome. Also, we managed to go 50 minutes on a patch with like 8 changes. I did take a long time on rants though, so, whatever. Patch 12.1 TLDR. There aren't a ton of changes, but as you can see from the timestamp of the video, I spent a lot of time talking about stuff that wasn't relevant to the patch. 4 items in a summoner get changed, and 4 champions get changed. Diana is getting a pretty meaningful clear speed boost. She is a 48% win rate jungler and a 51% win rate mid laner. The AP ratio buff on the passive will affect the mid lane win rate a little bit, but this will be a lot of jungle power. She should be a pretty viable jungler. Gangplank is like a 46% win rate champion. He's objectively not very strong. They are not buffing his late game burst damage in any way. They're buffing his overall teamfight presence because he can Q more often. They're also buffing his early laning phase a little bit so he can bully a bit more. Gangplank is weak at all phases of the game. He does not force early surrenders. He does not win late game teamfights. He is pretty flat. He is weak at pretty much all points. Gangplank could use buffs for most players. Rek'Sai is an absolute high elo terror. She is completely overbearing in Diamond 2+. Also, most players are stupid, including pro players, and they're maxing Q first. The optimal build for Rek'Sai is maxing E first. It is far better. It is much stronger. You should do that instead. That said, the change here is because players still haven't learned to adapt to Qmax. It's going to make Qmax less of a trap by lowering the E rank up. It's getting 1 less cooldown buff per second or per rank on Tunnel, and it's getting 5 less damage per rank up on Furious Bite. This should do quite a bit to buff Qmax. It should be an overall nerf for the champion. We'll see how it goes. Should be under the threshold afterwards. And it should make it a bit closer, but Emax might still be correct. I'm just not sure. Sona overall doing a bit too well in most elos, a small armor growth nerf, and 2 seconds on Song of Celerity. Essentially, Sona is a champion where if you don't lose lane too hard, you're just the best team fighting support in the game. I like the 2 second cooldown nerf to Song of Celerity is a good overall teamfight power nerf. I think it's actually a very wise change. The armor growth nerf is going to slightly tamp down her late game, which is, I think, fine. Tap down, clamp down, that was, whatever. Ultimately, yeah, Sona is still in a spot where she is an atrocious laner, very easy to abuse because she is incredibly frail, but a late game beast. Eclipse gets a 2 second nerf on its melee cooldown. Force of Nature gets, functionally, it changes from being worth, I believe, 50 MR to being worth 67 MR. Here with Force of Nature, when you get the thing fully stacked, so it's actually a pretty big deal in those cases. It's what, a 17 magic resist buff to this item late in a team fight? That's not absurdly good, but it's still quite strong. This is quite meaningful. This is a pretty good change. This is going to be a much stronger item, so take a look for Force of Nature in the new patch. Immortal Shield Bow loses 5 AD and a fair bit off the Lifeline Shield. Now, personally, I would be a fan of nerfing the plus AD off the Lifeline Shield because I think it's somewhat vestigial, and it makes the item kind of lie to you, but it's not the worst thing ever. It's kind of whatever. End of the day, this is going to be a pretty meaningful nerf to Shield Bow. Wit's End loses 10 MR. That's a pretty meaningful nerf here. And the biggest change is the fact that Teleport is getting reworked into a kind of dual purpose summoner. So in the early game, the cooldown is shorter, but you can only target allied towers. That is a very big deal. Once tower plating falls at 14 minutes, it's now the old version with a very short cooldown. That is better than the old version of Teleport up until level 16, which you didn't really care about the cooldown change that much anymore. Anyway, so pretty meaningful stuff here. This is going to be a very big deal. It does 2 major things. One, Top and mid lane can't TP into your bot lane skirmishes anymore. They have to go to the turret and come in defensively. That is a very big deal. That does a lot, by the way, for buffing lane bullies in bot lane. This does a whole lot more for playing Callista or whatever and just playing turbo aggressive because you're not going to get TP flanked. That's a very, very big deal. That means a lot. It also means champions like Ornn and Malphite can't just like take the L in lane, TP to bot, force a kill, because they have to TP to the tower, and that's a lot weaker. The roam is much more difficult to do. Good luck making that one happen. The other thing it does is for top lane and mid lane itself, where, hey, you're going to walk in and you're going to try to get lane control or whatever, and you try to push the wave in the tower, and they're like, actually, I've already reset, I've bought, I'm TPing to a minion, I'm making it vulnerable, we're holding the lane right here in front of my tower, and you can either try to fight me to get me off the turret, and good luck because my jungler's here, or you get frozen on and you have to burn your TP to get back to lane as well, and we have to play this dance. By TP only being allowed to go to turrets in the early game, you can do a lot more to basically cement your own power in the lane, I would argue. I think top lane actually becomes more skillful as a result because you can't just TP bot lane and get a double kill and, you know, lose top lane because your bot lane is bad. And your opponent can't just sort of wreck your wave management. So I think this is actually going to be very interesting for top lane being skill expressive. It does mean, though, that top lane is going to be more of an island. So we'll see where that goes for the early game. That's the patch rundown. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. See you next time. Bye-bye.